Okay, everyone. Thank you for everything in terms of the picture and for the speeches that we've heard up until now. The next part of our session is all about a forum, which will be moderated by Professor Paul Wells. So, Paul, would you like to? Yeah, yeah. Would you? Yeah, we keep going because I'm under very strict restrictions from Rizwan to keep with my timing. So I'm just moving on. Yeah, yeah. So, Paul, I think we will invite the panelists as well. So we will invite Gary as well and Vicky, and we also have online. Hopefully, you can hear us really well. We have Dr. Ashar bin Abdul Jamil, who is, as I said, head of accreditation at the University of Technology. And we have also on online, hopefully, everything is working. Yeah, Dr. Zan, can you speak so we can test? Perfect.
You
Thank
hear
you
me?
so much.
Yeah.
Yes, we can. And we can see you as well. And I also would like to invite, in terms of the online panel, Associate Professor Dr. Zanoid bin Ibrahim. And hopefully, if you can test your microphone as well.
Yes, this is Dr. Azhar. I think you mixed up with the Dr. Zainuddin. Yeah.
Oh, the
other one. Yeah.
Well, welcome either way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to hand this over to Paul. Yeah, I'm not sure if they can hear us online. Yeah. I know.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm just going to keep that live then. Yeah. And then we'll pass it like that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, welcome everybody. It was great to see you all here today. We had a wonderful welcome from everybody. So I'm not going to go through every list again. Sort of saying thank you to everybody individually. Thank you for coming. Great that the people who are here. Brilliant. But a big thanks to our online audience. A tremendous amount of you present there. Thank you so much for attending. We'll try and keep you engaged and hopefully have an enjoyable day. My name is Paul Wells. As I say, I'm the professor of film animation and screenwriting, and I work at Loughborough University with my colleagues here, and I am Rizwan, our star of the day, his first supervisor, and certainly his project has been a really interesting one to kind of engage with from the off. Just to give you a little bit of context there, we ought to say that one of the reasons I think that Rizwan is very nervous today is because he's playing any amount of roles. If he was just here, kind of introducing the idea of his research, then that would be fine. But he's not. He's running about, attending to the food, making sure everybody's here, organising the event, and so forth. So I think we should give him kind of a bit of slack. I'm thinking today, and say he's done a grand job, a fantastic job of getting today together with his friends and colleagues, which is great. And I just want to say that we're all obviously very proud of what he's achieved and what he's done. I'm glad that you did see his presentation there today. But for certainly in relation to today, being in front of some really quite high-powered and important people here today, it's great that he's here and he's doing as well as he is. So I know that you'll all forgive him for not doing his presentation live, but there's much else that he's doing, I promise you. So that's good. Just to give you a little context about his research, one of the most important things is when he first arrived, he had a strong sense that kind of what he wanted to do was actually very progressive, but progressive in a Malaysian context. It was something whereby he was kind of arriving and saying, do you know what, in Malaysia, there's some great stuff and there's interesting ways of learning and ways of kind of acquiring knowledge and so forth. But actually, it's not enough. I think that it has to kind of meet the digital age far more head on, and it needs to kind of embrace animation, motion graphics, or certain different kinds of methods in terms of its approach. And one of the kind of interesting things at first was that he wanted to just investigate that in general. He hadn't really put together the idea that, in fact, maybe in other learning cultures, other pedagogies elsewhere, that maybe progress had been made, and that Malaysia, in a certain sense, needed perhaps to respond to some of those developments and find some other ways in which it might work. And so we found that the immediate thing to do was to say, well, what knowledges do we have in a range of cultures, in the UK culture, for example, example, that might speak to the ways in which kind of Malaysian students might wish to learn, the ways in which Malaysian culture works, the way in which particular teaching strategies and traditional teaching strategies have kind of, you know, been developed over the years, and how might they be augmented, how might they grow in relation to, you know, the kind of technologies that perhaps are being used already elsewhere. So this was a natural thing that we thought that we could develop and work with, that it was an interesting project. And then we attached ourselves to the idea of, well, who actually are we talking to? You know, who are the audience here? The kind of Gen Z model is a very interesting one, but it's a very general one, isn't it? You know, we talk about Gen Z like we know who they are. You know, there's this vague age range that somebody came up with. There's this kind of set of young people, effectively in this age range, who are in fact pretty much digital natives. So how does that affect this debate? How should we define them? How should we define them in place? You know, is Gen Z different in the UK than it is in Malaysia, you know, and so forth. So there was a whole range of ways in which we thought that we could approach some of these kind of issues. And that's how really today evolved. It was about saying, well, how do we pose those questions? How do we kind of engage with the idea that the UK has got a, you know, a whole set of kind of learning models that for years and years it's been hugely self-conscious about. And certainly having been an external examiner in Malaysia, it was very interesting to kind of engage with cultures that were actually very traditional in their learning methods, and in fact had been very consistent about those learning methods as successful and pertinent, even coming into a kind of digital era, you know. And there was some challenges there about the way of taking traditional methods that seemed to work. You know, they were producing interesting students, intelligent students, but at the same time, were they students that were engaging sufficiently in the digital age, and in terms of really the speed of new technologies and their applications, not merely as it were in the culture, but in the classroom. Yeah, how should we use them? How should we kind of develop with them? So effectively, that's kind of, you know, why the day evolved. It's how Rizwan's PhD is evolving, and I have to say, you know, kind of, it's a little bit worrying, because it's kind of like a moving feast at the moment. You know, we're not really landing on kind of like, right, okay, what's the real focus of what we want to talk about? So today is also a little bit about that. It's about kind of like how our audience here and our audience online and our colleagues online, who are very, you know, very happy to have you join in with this panel, and basically to start to speak to all of those particular questions that I've just raised there. So thank you again for participating. Now, in the kind of desire to move on and press on with time, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to actually introduce themselves and to tell us a little bit about their research interests and their points of focus, and how in a certain sense they're pertinent to today's panel. Okay, I'm going to start online with Dr. Asbar, perhaps. You know, welcome again. Can I ask you to introduce yourself and the kind of work you do, and tell us a little about the way in which you feel pertinent to this discussion?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Paul Wells. Thank you for the invitations of this for this session. Okay, my name is Dr. Azhar Abdul Jamil from University of Technology Mara. The area or the concerns of area that I've involved in on the context of the designing of the curriculums, specifically for art and design, and also looking into the program for creative media and technology. So I basically involved in developing the program standard for our Malaysian Qualification Assurance in Malaysia, MQA, concerning on the context of various fields of this area of art and design and creative multimedia. And the interest of research is pertaining to my area is on visual communications and new media. So that is the very short brief of my areas and research concerning on the creative multimedia and art and design. Thank you, Prof. Paul.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Can I ask you an immediate question, which would be perhaps helpful to us, is one that says, obviously, in your job, in your kind of developmental work within curricula, have you seen significant change about how you want to develop curriculum in Malaysia? And kind of, if you have seen that change, how has that developed so far?
Yeah. When we have our first standard during 1999, that is where the Ministry of Higher Education were appointed what we call it as a Lembaga Agitasi Negara, and were converted into Malaysia Qualification Assurance. The developments of the curriculums that we have seen is very tremendously very fast, concerning especially on art and design, as what you have mentioned before, where how do we uh, move into the conventional teaching, especially on the teaching method, and also looking into the new ways of teaching methods, not just the teaching pedagogy, but also looking into the context of what are the new area or the new interests for the new future, on the context of a new program, pertaining to art and design, and also creative multimedia. Again, we can see what we have in Malaysia. The developments or the evolutions of this program were expanded into many colleges and university. At first, we can see during 1987, we can see that there is not much or not many universities that focuses on art and design. There's only 3 universities that has offered this sort of program. So now at 2024, we have almost nearly, if I can say, 150 or 300, 150 program what offer in various university, whether it's in private sectors or in the government university. Then we can see the expanding of this program were shown of the interest of the new era, specifically from the new generation. Yeah.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for giving that context, and we'll come back to that later. Perhaps I could
Thank you.
ask Professor Madhya then if he would introduce himself and tell us again about his background and some of his interests.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Professor Paul Wells. My name is Zainuddin. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Actually, I have 2 jobs in UITM. We call it University Technology Mara. So currently, I am in charging the Center of Innovative Learning Delivery Development to cater on how to not teaching the lecturers, but how to help our lecturers in order to use all the technology. We call it IR 4.0, all the virtual reality, augmented reality, all the robotic and kind of thing, to help and to enhance the teaching and learning delivery. So actually this is the big responsibility and challenging as well. So far we have about 9,000 academic staff to have this kind of adaptation of technology in order to include in their teaching and learning delivery. So yeah, for now, since 2018, the center been initiated by our former Vice Chancellor in 2018, and now about 7 years. I am the only one for now. Maybe it's about time to change the new head of CIDL or the center.
Okay.
That's about me, Prof.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about kind of the nature of kind of accreditation. Is this the kind of work that you've been involved in?
Actually, I am involving with some of the accreditation procedure, and a part of that, as I mentioned just now, we are falls under MQA, Malaysian Qualification Agency. So actually about 7 area. So we are talking about the delivery area 1, I think, if I'm not mistaken, curriculum development and delivery. So somehow we do have a different kind of delivery method according to the program for science and technology, social sciences. So they have different kind of methodology in delivery. So we do believe that every single academic staff, they have their own methodology and their own skills in order to deliver the content. For some reason, they have what we call conventional, more practical compared to the digital, or more practical to the latest technology. So we need to believe that we cannot replace the technology with the conventional. So for some reason, we can complement each other. So basically, we need to convince all the academic staff in order to balance which one is more appropriate in terms of teaching and learning delivery in Malaysian context.
No, that's tremendous. Thank you so much. I mean, this is where it's kind of raising all the kind of particular contexts that we're exploring today. The whole idea that they're not only talking about, Generation Z, we're talking about the generations that precede them that perhaps need to also be encultured in new methods and deliveries and so forth. We've got the kind of cultural and national contexts here around Malaysia and the UK and different kind of ways in which they're working. Got the context of art and design. That's a very particular kind of set of areas and disciplines and complexities to address. We've got a whole range of things going on in the classroom. So we've got a kind of moving feast here of complexity. Certainly the whole idea of accreditation some years ago was not merely something that was happening obviously in Malaysia. It was happening in a number of contexts whereby traditional training schools and art schools, polytechnics as it were coming under a broader rubric of university quality assurance, and those kind of things were really interesting to be part of. I was in several parties across various contexts that were looking at bringing together, as it were, what was previously training, previously conventional methods, ways in which it was adapting to kind of digital technologies, but also to kind of university measures of quality, of scholarliness, of the way in which, as it were, practice within university culture was perhaps different from professional practice, but also very different from the way in which practice had previously been seen. So this is a really important kind of moment that we're considering. So thank you to our guests online. We'll come back to you. I'm going to come live into the room now, and I'm going to ask Gary if he'll introduce himself.
Hopefully that'll work. Yep. So I'm Gary Bennett. I'm a professor of digital creativity in the School of Design Creative Arts, and I suppose one of the things that's sort of pertinent to in terms of the Gen Z generation is, for me, is the fact that that I've sort of seen the evolution of students. I'm a bit older. I've sort of got this sort of evolution in my students. I was initially a lecturer in human-computer interaction in the School of Computer Science, University of Nottingham in 2000. That's when I started as a lecturer, and I had a certain set of students then. And then you've seen the sort of how things have changed, and particularly with COVID, how big an impact that has had on students' expectations for their learning. I was in computer science, and I moved to engineering in 2008. But then become professor of human factors, and it came to Loughborough just a year ago. As I say, into design and creative arts. My sort of research it's interesting how that's evolved over the years, but for the purposes of this conversation, it's very much about the role and the power of immersive technologies in the higher education sector. So I've been living and breathing that, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, where I've had students in sort of fantastical virtual worlds as avatars, quite often in situations where I've only known my students as avatars. And that gets very, very interesting and potentially disruptive for the sector. But that's become a research project in its own right. You survey the students, you video the sessions, you write papers, and you get into all sorts of interesting issues about the nature of those worlds and what that means, and the nature of students being avatars and the interactivities that are possible. So reflecting on that and the engagement, hopefully I can bring some sort of stuff there related to what it means to have these kinds of technologies embedded into the sector. Okay.
Fabulous, thank you. Vicky, I wonder if you could introduce yourself.
Have I turned it on?
First technology, see, we're on it now. We're on it.
Hi, I'm Vicky Locke. I'm a professor in Loughborough Business School. So thank you, design people, for letting me creep in the back door. Like Gary, I've had a number of different careers and developed over time, and sort of snowballed and carried forward what I've learned along the way, in a hope that the transferable skills that I've developed as a teacher have gone with me. So I started out as a professional musician with a degree in music and arts. So I started off in the sort of areas that you guys are interested in. So design and photography were my specialisms, and performing arts and acting. So I ended up as a teacher, teaching music and working as a professional violinist. And then I burnt out and decided I wanted to be a language teacher. So I travelled, as many of you are doing, ended up taking a year out that turned into 7 years out, travelling and teaching English as a foreign language. So you may have met people like me if you've studied English as a foreign language. But then I came back to the UK to do a master's degree in education because I realised that, yeah, education was the thing I loved more than music at the time. I wanted to keep my music for myself and share education practices. So I did applied linguistics and education. And then I started teaching in universities and I really enjoyed teaching adults. So before, when I taught children, you cared so much about what was happening to the children because they were children, that it sometimes overshone the sort of imparting the knowledge to them along the way. Whereas with adults, I could focus on what are we learning, how are we learning it, how are you going to use it in the workplace. Once I'd done that for a few years, about 10 years, I discovered that it wasn't the language teaching that I loved, it was being bossy and managing things. So I did a PhD at Leicester University, where I worked in the language department as a senior lecturer. I did a PhD in the management school. And then from there, I ended up at Warwick Business School for 8.5 years, as the assistant dean for blended learning for part of that, and course director for the distance learning MBA, with a 3-year transformation project, which got us from number 2 in the world to number 1 in the world with the Financial Times ranking. So that got me my reputation in universities as being someone who can transform stuff so that people pay attention and they study and they do well and they tell the Financial Times about it, and then the ranking goes up for the university. The work I did there then got me headhunted by a number of universities, but I ended up at Loughborough because I could see that there was a people focus at Loughborough that I didn't see at other universities. So how people are learning, not what they say to the rankings people about it, how they're actually learning, how they're taking that into the workplace. That was a focus that I found really exciting. So I was brought in to redesign the 9 undergraduate programs at Loughborough Business School. We're a year into the project, so I started just before Gary did. So we're both still relatively new to Loughborough. And what I've done is I've carried across into our redesign of the undergraduate programs at Loughborough. I have, at the business school, I have brought through all of the techniques that I learned along the way as a musician, teaching music to children, teaching language to adults, and things around online learning. I know what works. I know what's number 1 in the world for what works for online learning. For business, I'm now carrying that across into principles that we can have which transcend the business school and go across the whole university. So working very closely with Gary with our new hologram technology, we're looking at how can this impact on the whole university and the sector, rather than me just focusing on how can I get a business school up the rankings. But that's me. So very much into all of the pedagogies, and I'm a professor of teaching practice. And so I also train other teachers in the stuff that I've learned, and I share ideas.
Fabulous, very good. Well, I've been at Loughborough since the 14th century, and we started off with a quill, and effectively, you know, we've seen a lot of technological change since. It's been an interesting development. One of the biggest things, though, that already we're beginning, all of our 4 participants on the panel are beginning to kind of hint at, and I think this is quite important, is the way in which kind of disciplines, in a certain sense, have in some ways melted. They've kind of collapsed in many ways. We've got some traditional disciplines, but necessarily, in order to make progress, we need to break across disciplines and work in transdisciplinary ways, all sorts of ways in which we're working with other kinds of stakeholders, for example, outside academic life, but also ways in which within a university that disciplines can work together and be enabling in terms of bringing each other's languages or methodologies to actually progress the kind of work that we're doing. But I'm going to go back to our audience here, our Gen Z audience. Let's go back. Now, I'm intrigued to actually find out really who these people are, I've got to say. You know, Rizwan, in his, you know, he comes in, he smashes doors down and he says, no, 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 Paul, they're all goldfish, you know. And I said, well, are they really? You know, sure, we should explore that a little bit more, you know. This attention span thing is an interesting one, isn't it? Because my kids are 28 and 23, but I have a grandson now, thank you, And I'm very worried, therefore, about the nature of how he's going to be educated and as a digital native, and when I should pass him the iPad, when I should say, you know, as a 2-year-old, just work your way around that, son, and see how it goes, you know. So let's get something from our panel about their version of Gen Z. Who are they? And do they differ, for example, in Malaysia to the way in which they might, you know, differ here? So maybe Gary, go on. I'll ask Gary. You can start us off on who are Gen Z.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with that one then. So obviously you know you can define Gen Z just purely by when they were born. That's the sort of the very sort of simple perspective of it. I think to me, you know, and there's been lots of research around this sort of this whole area. To me, a lot of it in relation to education is about expectations. What they will expect, and there's been some sort of quite big surveys on this sort of thing, that Gen Z will have different expectations related to their education experience compared to previous generations, and a certain amount of that is about technology, expecting more technology to be part of their education experience and not to be sort of droned on by a dusty old professor in a lecture theatre.
That's me.
And me. And technology, you know, is an increasingly part, and they expect the teachers to be role models in the use of that technology. That's quite important as well, because it relates to staff development and stuff like that. And I think there's a whole thing about what the sort of the attention span bit, to me, is more about distractions. It's better to sort of think about it more about distractions. There are more competing demands in our life, and some of that comes through technology. I'm starting to go, where's my phone? And there is sort of generational differences in the sort of attitudes towards technology and how much people might be prone to distractions. You know, my core research area is actually on things like driver distraction. So there you get really into what do you mean by distraction. And we've not evolved as a species. So there's so in that respect, this sort of 8-second, 9-second thing is sort of isn't helpful, because I think it just to attention is a very complex construct.
Yes.
And to start saying that we can break it down to a single number is just crazy. I think what you do see, just going back to the sort of the driver distraction thing, is that younger people are prone to more distractions in the safety context of driving. So you do find there are more accidents associated with young drivers texting while driving, using their phones while driving, and so this susceptibility to distraction, I think, is an interesting one in the education context, and it really emphasizes the fact that you need to then have educational content that really that is just going to grab your attention and sustain your attention. Okay, it's that sort of thing.
Okay, let's ask then Dr. Azhar, is that your feeling about sort of Gen Z in Malaysia? Is that a similar thing? Who do you see as Gen Z in Malaysia?
If I could classify or categorize the Gen Z, is basically what I know is it is from 1995 to up to 2010. So I think during that time, 1999, when we look at the evolutions of what we have of our generations of Gen Z, during that period of time, that the exposure in terms of what we have in Malaysia, yes, the internet was something new. Although the speed is very low, where we used to use a modem during that time in 1995. On the context of the applications that being used during that time for the student, yes, during that time we use Netscape, Mozilla to search, and the concern of the teaching approach in Malaysia, we still use conventional way, but still we do have we use some of the applications for the developments of multimedia, where I used to teach macromedia director, Flash, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Flash, on the context of a simple, we use simple animation and teach the student bouncing ball, perhaps understanding the fundamentals of animation. On this context where we can see the focus of the new Gen Z, what we have is we can see positively the Gen Z is much more multitasking, should I say. They can do a lot of work at one go, like what Professor Gary mentioned. They can drive while they're texting.
That's a very interesting thing, isn't it? About the whole kind of idea of, one person's distraction is another person's multitasking, So that's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? But I dare any of us to turn around and say that actually, I mean, Gary gave it away really when he said, well, okay, I'm talking to you now and I'm really focused, but actually I wonder how many messages have now come into my inbox while I've been away, and so forth. So these are big issues, and of course they are about, the shift of the model of our attention. My children, for example, are both teachers, and they both say to me, how do you concentrate for such a long time, Dad? How do you also deal with, because they teach classes where kids are easily distracted, and a lot of special needs kids too, who are even more specially distracted, and they're already kind of like finding, their work in the classroom enormously complex accordingly, So anyway, let's push some of this on, because obviously we're time constrained. Let's think about that was very helpful, Dr. Azal. Thank you, in terms of introducing some of the technology, for example. Now, Vicky, I mean, you would have seen some changes over time in terms of the technologies in delivery and in the classroom and so forth. Give us a sense of how you think they have innovated, changed things. What's been the kind of the shift of emphasis there? What's happened?
Yeah, so originally when I was so around 2015, when I was redesigning distance learning, we were looking at concepts of, okay, so if somebody's looking at these materials on their phone, is the screen going to work? Is it accessible? Are the slide fonts big enough for them to see if they're accessing this while they're on the move? So we were thinking about accessibility. Those people weren't Gen Z, but we were thinking, this is the reality of learning these days. People have to be able to see things on their phone as well as on their computer screen, on their laptop screen. Then things moved along, and we were thinking, well, if we're engaging in a forum, how many times, if someone's on their phone, how many times is the average human being happy to scroll before they see a teacher response in a forum? Because we found that student feedback was, we're not going to, what's the point in me writing something in there if you're not responding? I need to have teacher engagement with what I'm doing. So we literally sat there putting our forums through, do one scroll, put in a teacher comment that responds to what the students had written above, just to encourage more students to read further, because they were less interested in what their classmates were seeing, more interested in what we were saying. So we had to, it ended up being something like roughly 1.5 scrolls before people would stop scrolling. So we were doing experiments like that. Time moves forward, and now we're looking at what can we do in the first 10 seconds to catch their attention so they don't move on to something else. Because looking at how people interact with Instagram, for example, they'll see a snippet of something and then they'll keep scrolling. They might even like without watching the whole thing. So in any online material, any classroom activities that we're doing, thinking, what can we do? So for me, I reached back into what I did as a language teacher, and standard language teaching practice is you bring something in at the beginning to bring the students' attention to the present time in the class. So we would bring in realia, bring in a newspaper, bring in an apple, something that brings the students' attention to the topic of the class and helps them filter away all of those distractions that they were carrying on their shoulders when they came in. So we're now doing that in a digital way. So we're making sort of heading slides with an image of something that piques interest, showing a case video at the beginning before talking about the theory that relates to the topic of the day. So it's the same principle in the old days of bringing in an apple, putting it on the table, and all the students suddenly going, what's the apple for? I am now thinking about today's class. So that intriguing thing. But now we're making digital artifacts to catch that, whether it's in the classroom and it's on the screen behind me as people come in, or whether it's something in the online environment that I'm posting, there has to be something that catches the student's attention. And my son is 16, so he's in this group. And if I catch his attention, he will be gaming for 3 hours non-stop. He won't even get up to eat or go to the toilet. If he's excited about that thing he's doing, he will do it. And if it's homework and the teacher has given him some videos and some exercises, it's as if he's gaming, because he sees the relevance of that. He enjoys the format. He likes it. But he also said to me, because I interrogated him in preparation for today, he also said to me that even if the teacher is some stuffy old guy standing at the front talking for hours, if he thinks it's relevant to him, he will pay attention. So for a 16-year-old in the UK, it's all about relevance to me. For example, he's really into science. The scientist doesn't even need to do an experiment. My son loves science. He wants to be an engineer. He will pay attention to every single word that comes out. But I think we also need to keep in mind that Gen Z human beings in different parts of the world and in different demographics may have different approaches and expectations to their learning, depending on their culture, their family. We're a Muslim family, so we have very much a routine set of lifestyle points. So my son is used to sitting down for a period, doing a thing, and then having a reward. That's the way our family works. Other UK families may not have the same patterns of working. So. Yeah.
Fantastic. Some really interesting stuff there. Thank you. In terms of the kind of the way in which, for example, the whole idea of the attention span thing suddenly goes out of the window there, doesn't it? The whole kind of idea that if I'm doing something I'm interested in, then I tell you what, I can do it for the next 3 days. The whole interesting thing about television, it's like, oh, blimey, television, you can't watch anything more than, hour and a half, 2 hours. What about all that binge watching then? What about all those series that you're happy to sit through episode after episode after episode? If something captures your attention and engages your attention, then maybe it's going to work. Maybe there's something at stake there.
All K-dramas.
And I would say one of the interesting things there, which kind of, I don't know how much time, obviously we've got no time, there are a million things to take up today, but the whole gamification thing is a really interesting thing about the impact of gaming and the model of the way in which that's taken concentration, where that's taking it, and of course where it situates the player. The player is actually involved and engaged, and can learn through those models and stay a long time in that model of participation. So, all of those kind of factors are really important, but those cultural differences, again, very, very important too. But those shifts of technology, just in the classroom, the expectations, many teachers, of a certain vintage will take up their first 10 seconds of a session by saying, will you please put your phones away? That's the best way of actually trying to engage students. For most of us, I think we recognise that that's a forgotten battle. That the kind of the presence of the laptop, the presence of the mobile in any context means that you've got to work with it and not against it. And certainly some of those factors are going to come. So let's go to Professor Madhya there. I'm sure you've been listening with interest about some of those things. Now, when you've been encountering changes, in terms of the kind of deliveries and so forth that Dr. Azhar was mentioning earlier, what have you been encountering in terms of responses to learning about those things?
Yeah, okay. For instance, in Malaysia, actually, in my responsibility, we created one of the practice. Students need to bring their own devices. So how could hold their phone within the classroom without using the phone, because they don't have any laptop, because they need to bring their own devices. So basically, in our Z generation, I think you don't have not much different among the country, because they're already exposed to the technology. They talk each other. But for some reason, I believe most of the Generation Z is the technocentric. They are technocentric. So somehow, for some reason, they are more advanced than the lecturers. So this is the big challenge. We need to get the joint point to enable the teachers, the old timers, with the young generation. So how to make sure all the technology driven being used for the student, for the generation, for the Z Generation Z. So for instance, this is our practicing. We have difficulty to actually teach our lecturers in order to use artificial intelligence, for instance. So just imagine all the students have the ability to use artificial intelligence. So when the lecturers have the limited ability to use artificial intelligence, the student query. So what is the difference between the artificial intelligence that we use compared to what that you show? So this is the thing that we need to ask the lecturers. You need to more beyond, ahead, forward, compared to the student achievement. So somehow the student need to look into what we can get. The thing that Professor Vicky mentioned just now, the relevant. So whatever that you have right now, is it the same thing that I can get in our platform? So you need to get something in actually attractive. So attention span need to have like something they don't get any other platform unless from the lectures.
Wow, that's a real pressure, isn't it, on deliverers? I'm really glad I'm retiring, by the way. You know, that's great. I can do without that. That would be great. But let's take up that issue. It's a very important one, isn't it, about this kind of levels of expertise and the expectations around expertise. Many of us, I think, over the years have maybe encountered, certainly teachers of any sort have encountered any number of students in the classroom who've probably got, certainly in my case, more technical expertise often than I have. And I have to say, right, okay, so what are my resources? How do I kind of like maintain the idea that I have some authority in the classroom somehow, But part of that, I think, is about the fact that certainly in our strategy in terms of our undergraduate programs is that we've been very bottom up in terms of the way in which we actually, deliver our courses. We say to the students, who actually are you? Who are you? What do you want from this delivery? What do you bring to us? And basically, I think that's made us a lot more mobile as a set of staff in order to try and respond to the needs of the students and the kinds of people that the students are, as opposed to imposing perhaps too much top down in terms of our kind of authority, shall we say, as people with expertise. We can kind of choose where we're pertinent and choose where we can drive and stimulate and inspire. So I think this has been a kind of a real sea change for deliverers of a certain age, certainly for myself. I go back to PhDs that, I'm an English graduate, as you can probably tell, Lord knows. But, it's the kind of literature about D.H. Lawrence and Virginia Woolf, is not going to necessarily land well with our digital audience, that I teach now. So there's a whole kind of range of things that change and we have to adapt to change. But how we adapt to it is actually really very important. So I'm going to come back to Gary on that one, because Gary's really kind of been pushing some envelopes around the idea of how do we learn and with what methods do we learn. So give us a sense, Gary, of maybe some of your strategies, because obviously you've done a lot of immersive learning. And as you said, kind of students as avatars. What will happen next? Go on then, Gary.
Okay. As I said, sort of quite earlier on, I've sort of definitely lived and breathed this technology. I think there is a bit of a myth about Gen Z being better with technology than other generations. I think they certainly will use that technology more and more in their day-to-day lives than other older generations, but that doesn't mean that they really understand that technology. So you see this quite often that if you start saying that, okay, we're going to do a bit of programming in this module, many students whoa, sort of will run a mile, where they find this very, very scary. And there's sort of the nuts and bolts of how that technology actually works and how you can control it at a deep level, I think is not something you see in this generation at all. But I go back to my point about the expectations is really important, and that has definitely changed. I think one of the things that going back to an earlier point I just wanted to get in there is that immersive technology actually is very interesting in terms of removing distractions, because you effectively put people into a world and those and then you can gamify that, and you can do all sorts of interesting interactions, but you've sort of essentially take the real world away. And that is quite powerful as a way of almost forcing engagement, and I've certainly seen that where students who otherwise would find it very difficult to engage in a physical classroom, in a virtual classroom, actually are really empowered by that. and that is sort of, I've seen that, this has come out in the research as well. Behind the veil of an avatar is quite empowering for many people. Yeah, and particularly those who might be sort of more sort of on the sort of neurodiverse side of things. It's very, it increases confidence to speak up in class. And I had a lot of that saying, I would happily speak up in class as an avatar, and I would engage with people that I would never engage with in real world classes, because in real world classes, students will often sit with students they know, and then there's a whole sort of social thing there. Whereas on a virtual reality class, then people do all sorts of things, and that becomes really, really interesting as well. So I know your main point was it was related to sort of staff, I think.
Well, not necessarily, actually. I think that's pertinent. I think that nails it. And one of the kind of things that we're always defeated by time, so we've got just a few minutes left. So I want to try and just kind of like get a comment from each of our panelists on just a final question, which is one that says, okay, so we've raised a lot of kind of issues here, that Rizwan needs to be making a lot of notes on and kind of unpacking the literature around, in the sense that that we're kind of at a very fluid and complex moment at the moment. There's no two ways. That kind of generationally, obviously we're changing. People are expecting new things in the classroom. People probably are expecting a whole range of things from the lives that they ultimately lead that link to their education and what they want from their education. So it's a very complex area, but it's also one that's very much about times, places, where are you, what part of your life you're in, how you are growing, how you are developing. So I'm going to ask, each of our panelists what they think actually is the biggest challenge of this moment, as it were, in terms of the way in which they view their work, their jobs, and the way in which they're approaching that. What's your biggest challenge at the moment, and how you are approaching it? And then hopefully we'll make some final points after that. So can I start with Dr. Azhar? What's your biggest challenge at the moment in terms of what you're doing, and how are you approaching that?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Paul. The biggest challenge is, as what Malaysia, we have very different backgrounds of student, where our focus is for UITM or University Technology Mara, we are focusing developing student where from rural area. The concerns on the rural area that has a very limited capabilities in terms of fund to have their, for example, technology, especially. Some of them can't even afford to purchase a computer. On that context. On the second context is looking into the exposure on the experiencing the software. Understanding the software and whether they can manage, or we need to teach them in some areas of right from the start on the context of this what we call it as limitations that they have. But the Ministry of Education are trying to embark into these issues, where some of these students were given a scholarships and even fund so that they can purchase this sort of technology, or for example the computers and so on. The concerns of challenges of various students, and again the ability of their specialization or even their concerns, the area that we need to focus on the levels of where we want to bring them. For example, in Malaysia, we need to have at first level, depending on their qualifications, they were allowed to do certificate, and then they move on to diploma. Whether they can sit to advanced diploma, then only they can continue their degree level. So the challenges from the diploma is where we focuses on the skill level.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, all of the things that you mentioned there are absolutely crucial, aren't they? The kind of the role of the individual, the role of the background, the rural context, the economic context. The resources, and availability of resources, and the way in which people can participate them, and then of course quality and standards. The whole idea of how you might be able to use these tools, but can you use them effectively? So that's terrific. Professor Badia, what's your main challenge at the moment, and how are you approaching it?
Yeah, the big challenge from my point of view is our lecturer, our academic staff, to enable our academic staff to become technocentric, to adapt all the technology in delivery. So somehow about 9,000 academic staff to make sure they can adapt and adopt the technology into the method of delivery is quite challenging because, as you know, the technology is costing. So somehow we need to buy some of the technology, and the new technology is coming over. Then we don't know what is the next. For instance, when you talk about artificial intelligence, just split second, and we all of the students enable with the technology. So what is next? We don't know. We don't have any idea what will coming over. So basically, one of the words from our first American First Lady: the past is history. Today is a gift. Tomorrow is a mystery. So for some reason, when we look into one of the movie, I think you can remember one of the wisdom words mentioned by one of the character, the master of Uruguay, the Kung Fu Panda movie. Have you recalled it? So basically the word is mentioned by the first lady, American First Lady, the Roosevelt. So mentioned by the one of the character animation more attracting compared to the main person. So somehow you mentioned about the gamification. So I believe that the gamification can enable the attractive learning experience to the student, but somehow to enable our teachers, our lecturers use the gamification element in their teaching delivery is not easy, but somehow it's doable. But that is part of the challenging as well.
Yeah, well, that's a great list of challenges there. Certainly the whole kind of idea about how do we enable our staff? How do we want our staff to kind of engage with students? How should they use these technologies? And how should they use them at a time where if AI pops up in the popular imagination, we've always had AI for many, many years, but put it into the hands of the public, give them some apps, give them some ways of engaging with it, and suddenly students are going to be jumping on that and working with that. And there's going to be great expectation of AI, VR, AR, whatever else we're using in the classroom, and there's little time for us to catch up. There's little time for us to adapt those technologies and find kind of the teaching methods that work. So thank you for that. That's terrific. Okay, Gary, Vicky, some quick final thoughts would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so very much in line with what the colleagues were saying online. I'm facing similar problems with my programs. The matching resources and human beings. We have plenty of enthusiasm, but the time to actually get confident with technologies before we have to then use them in front of our students. People need mentoring, they need support. And so, for a few of us who are confident, it's putting a lot of weight on our workloads to train people up and get them confident so they can actually launch using simple things like quiz tools and things in class on a way towards eventually using, for example, our hologram technology to bring guest speakers into class or develop their own case studies, interactive case studies. So it's kind of planting seeds slowly and finding tiny little bits of time where we can support people and build on the enthusiasm that they have. Definitely no lack of enthusiasm, it's just a lack of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gary.
This has come up for me quite a lot over the last year or so. It's not difficult to enthuse staff with this technology and what the potential is for their use in their actual practice, but it's a very different thing to empower them. And this is, I like to describe this as a set of pillars that all have to be in place. And if any one of those isn't there, the whole thing falls down. And only one of them is hardware, is having the kit. There's a whole thing about curriculum focus software. There's a whole thing about staff. We've talked about that and about staff skills and, attitudes, etc. But there's also sort of practice informed research. There's the research to how best to use this. And some of that is about is theories as well. It's very poor for theory in here. It's just sort of, you know, lots of studies, individual studies showing learning benefits from new technology for, you know, particularly for the sort of Gen Z. But there's not really sort of great theory about why and what the affordances of the fundamental affordances of the technology actually are. And then there's a whole thing of top-down coordination.
Yeah.
So it has to come, top-down is ultimately more effective than bottom-up in terms of how this gets brought into the, you know, business as usual.
Okay. Okay, lots of great stuff there as summaries. I think the one small thing that I would add is that the striking thing for me is that our future educational models might become far more collaborative as well, in terms of using expertise from students far more as part of our methods of learning, in terms of sharing that and sharing kind of ways of doing things that are taken from various disciplines, but also kind of appreciate that the student bigger contributions perhaps in terms of the way in which they learn through kind of an active and kinetic, you know, sort of engagement too. Okay, will you help me please to thank our great panelists here, Dr. Azhar, okay, Dr. Madhya, Gary, Vicky, thank you so much. That was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah.
So what's happening next? Over to the end, right? To Alex.
Over to me.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Thank you so much for quite interesting discussions happening here. So I'm sure, Rizwan, you have a lot of food for thought when it comes to future direction of your research. We have quite a few things when it comes to the human element. It was quite interesting what Dr. Azahir, Professor Azahir mentioned around how we don't want to be bored anymore as people, and it's not just the generational Z or generation Alpha that's coming up. The whole idea of always wanting to do more than just one task. I was listening to the panel, but I'm much like Gary. I'm going to check my email. I'm going to just continue to listen to my to this discussion that's happening now. So there are lots of things to think about, Rizwan, I think, when it comes to where do you land this, as Paul mentioned before. So initially we had a Q&A also sort of embedded in this. Rizwan, can I go ahead and have a bit of a Q&A session because you're the boss? Yeah. So I propose we have a few minutes just before we say goodbye to our online colleagues and participants. Is there anything here in the room or from the online participants, any questions that you have for our panel that we could hopefully answer in about 5-10 minutes? So any questions from you? I'm going to come to you so I can, so everyone can hear us. Go ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, it's Mohammed. My question, I'm very interested in this topic, and then I would like to propose something, because the trinity of learning is the human, the way of teaching, and the knowledge itself. And then throughout our conversation today, I believe I would like to suggest need of content creation or content relation to be put forward, as this is very important. As the storytelling begins, we tell a story in the movie, always same love story, but what picked the love story is the curiosity. And relating to Generation Z, I believe they need to have curiosity to avoid distraction. There is a topic about attention span. And then also I would like to suggest the term that might be familiar to everyone, which is FOMO, the fear of missing out. Because 10 seconds, you have the hook on social media, yes, but it's also about what are we presenting to them, what content relation or content creation are attracting to them. So the whole process of teaching and learning would be successful, and then we are able to achieve the expectance of the million of the students that we're teaching. So that's what I would like to propose, if we can consider content creation / or content relation as things are depending on where they're based on, like in rural schools, in rural area, or in different contexts of students. in different levels of education.
Thank you. Okay, so who wants to give us their thoughts on this whole idea around content creation? Go ahead, Paul.
I'll just give you a minute on that, which is kind of like having been in a lifetime of production. Basically, for me, content is king, content is king, content is king. And therefore, ultimately, I even in my old age, even if I have some notion of how I think technologies are going to work, or how you can actually innovate in the classroom, or how you might actually bring technology to the classroom, the biggest and most important success in the classroom is about decent content, and and the production of decent content. And I still believe in that, and I still believe that I'm imaginative and mobile enough to try and deliver that, that idea, and to bring content into the classroom. So that's kind of my belief. So I'm with you on that one. Sure. Shut up.
So with what I took from being a school teacher was that you teach the same curriculum to all of the schools, but you make children interested in it by relating it to their local environment. And so when I moved into teaching universities, teaching languages, and then teaching business, I carried across. When I'm getting to know a new set of students in my class, I find out beforehand with a survey, where have you worked? What experience do you have? Where are you from? Where do you want to end up? And then I look at the subject area destinations information. Where do students who take this program usually end up? And then I will hang things there, whatever theoretical frameworks that we need to do, I will hang those on case studies which relate to either things the students are already familiar with or things that they want to see in their destination. And then in order to keep them interested, I'll bring in real human beings from industry to stand there and say, yes, I'm 5 years older than you. I did this program and this is where I am now. And this is how I got here. And this is why that particular theoretical framework is important because I use it every day. That way, the student has that relationship with the content. And I know that I'm ticking the boxes on what I have to include for my accreditations, but I'm making it available to the student in a format where they sense a connection to it. And using multimedia, using realia, human beings, using alumni is a way to help my students engage with that. But also keeping in mind something that one of my MBA students said to me from the distance learning program, don't bring me all the way around the world from Australia to do something that I could do at home. So I also use that principle. So I'm not asking my students to do anything in class that they could easily do at home. So deciding of that content, what is the best delivery method for it? Is it some amazing infographic? Is it a cartoon? Is it a how-to video that they can access in flipped learning? Or is it something we need to work through and discuss in class together in small teams? So not just looking at what is the content, but how am I bridging the gap between the student and the topic and make it relevant to them, ticking the boxes I have to keep my job, and also make it something that they can carry forward into the workplace in the future. And they can email me later and say, 10 years ago, you taught me this and I'm using it every day. And then my job is done and I'm happy. Well, I just need one of those a year. Yeah.
Gary?
Yes, from my perspective, I think one of the things that's been quite interesting just in terms of my own sort of journey in sort of the use of these technologies is just how motivated students can be if they're at the top of Bloom's taxonomy and are creating themselves and they're using the technology to be creative, obviously in design and creative arts. That's even more of a core thing than it might be in other parts of the university sector, and so yeah, you see their eyes light up when they realize they're actually creating something new themselves. And even more if they can see that it's linked to research, this really cutting edge stuff. And I sort of reflect back and think, actually, that sort of happened to a degree in stuff I've done in the past. I mentioned about sort of, the research I've done in driver behavior. A lot of that's been about future vehicles. And I always sort of noticed the students' eyes light up when you started talking about sort of technology that they might aspire to have at some point in their lives, but they don't have now. And so when you're talking about, sort of yeah, sort of state-of-the-art vehicles that have all these different technologies, you know, sort of high-end vehicles, then certainly for a certain part of your audience, that becomes like really engaging, and they want to know more about that. So so yeah, rather than talking about old technology, I remember as a student myself, I won't say which university, sort of lecturers using sort of old black and white photos from the 50s and 1950s and thinking this is nothing to do with my life. So sort of things that relate either to my life now or even better to a life I aspire to have. So Vicky says this is quite powerful with students.
Thank you, Gary. Quite interesting future-facing content there. I'm just going to come to our online panelists. Professor Azhar, where do you stand in terms of content? How important is content when it comes to that trinity which you just mentioned?
Yeah, I do agree. When we look into content creations or well, shall I say, product development, we can have the same content for the past 10 years, but how do we bring the content into the new directions or the new media or even for the new audience in the context of the content or the technology? How do you deliver? This again need to work vice versa between the student, the lecturers with high capability of technologies, and how the student can learn on a new way or new approach of delivering the content, that not to forget the fundamentals on the relations with the human or the people or even the audience. So we cannot just focus. Yes, I do agree. Looking into the context of content creations or the importance of content, but relations with the contents and the audience is also important to specific or emphasize the segment or the audience that the product that been developed. I think you need to work both ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What about you, Professor Madhya? Where do you stand in content creation?
Yeah, I think I need to share one of the story, which is very inspired me. One of the teachers in our very rural area, which is they don't have the technology. So the student don't have the exposure. I give one of the situation is that this teacher teaching English to the student, and at the end of the year, the student fail the subject. Why? Because the question is that describe your experience in the LRT. LRT is the commuter station, like train, electric train, something like that. So these children, they don't have experience in that situation. So that's why the teachers noticed that. So he created the danger room. Have you heard about danger room from the X-Men movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they create the danger room to simulate the situation, to enable the children experience how the electric station is look like. So in order to empower the knowledge through the content, I think is very important. The creativity of the teachers, not even the technology, but somehow to adapt the maybe same way with the technology, because according to the technology is not really on the digital, but somehow whatever can help you to empower the knowledge to the student is part of the technology as well. So what these teachers did as well, I think is very, very creative. Then end up the student understood well according to the approach, and I think that is very inspired me, and I pass to all the teachers to use this kind of method in order to empower the student knowledge as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think this whole idea of experiential learning is something that we can't ignore anymore as lecturers, as people in education. I'm very aware that it's getting very late online and in Malaysia there. So I just want to, before we finish this session, I want to give the panelists another final round of applause for sharing their views. Thank you again. And I think we are going to say goodbye to you online. Thank you for making time. I hope those of you who stayed with us up until now found the session useful.